The teacups were still warm, but the chair at the table remained empty, and I already knew he would never sit there again. The steam rising from the porcelain cups curled into the silence of my kitchen, fading almost as quickly as it appeared. I had baked almond cookies the night before, arranging them neatly on a plate the way Jonathan liked. Now they sat untouched, their sweetness turning bitter in the air of a house that felt suddenly foreign. The evening sun slipped through the blinds, striping the wooden floor with pale light. I stood there, staring at the chair opposite mine, waiting for the familiar sound of a key in the lock. For 15 years, 7 o'clock had meant the door would open, Jonathan's voice would steady the air, and his calm presence would anchor me. But tonight, there was only silence. A silence that pressed into my chest until I thought I might break. On the hallway table, his keys lay in a careless scatter, but one caught my eye, longer, sharper-edged, with grooves unlike the rest. He always brushed it off when I asked. "Nothing important, Ellie. Just an old lock." My hand hovered over it, then pulled back, as though even in death he might scold me for touching what was off-limits. The day of the funeral had passed in a blur. Black coats and polished shoes moved around me like shadows. Neighbors from church offered dishes I couldn't eat. Strangers clasped my hands and whispered that Jonathan had been an extraordinary man, their voices rehearsed, like they were repeating lines from a script. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded when words failed me, but inside I felt hollow, a spectator at my own life. Maggie stayed close through it all. She pressed a paper cup of water into my hand again and again, knowing I would never drink it. She sat beside me as the pastor spoke words I couldn't absorb. "He was good to you," she whispered once, her voice cracking on the word good. She didn't press further. Maggie never did. It was Celine who unsettled me. My younger sister swept in late, her perfume too strong, her embrace too long, her tears suspiciously absent. "I'm so sorry, Elle," she murmured against my ear. "Jonathan was like a brother to me." Her tone was smooth, but her eyes carried something else, something sharper. Later that evening, after the house had emptied and Maggie had left me with one of her endless casseroles, Celine lingered in the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of wine without asking, the way she always had since we were girls. "Listen," she said, swirling the glass, her eyes avoiding mine. "I know this isn't the time, but Jonathan loaned me some money a while back. I was hoping we could settle it, now that you're taken care of." The words fell like shards on the floor. I stared at her, too stunned to speak. "What money?" I asked finally, my voice dry. Celine blinked, then smiled faintly, the way you do when someone tells a silly joke. "Oh, I guess he never mentioned it. He always wanted to help me, you know," said I deserved a break. Something inside me twisted, the room tilted. Jonathan had never spoken a word about this, not once in 15 years. I left her there, sipping her wine in my kitchen, and drifted through the house like a ghost. My hand touched the banister, which was polished smoothly by Jonathan's grip, the bookshelf he had built with quiet pride, and the wedding photo that suddenly looked staged, two strangers dressed as bride and groom. Every object seemed to hold a question I could not answer. When I reached the hallway, my eyes returned to the keys. The unfamiliar one gleamed beneath the lamplight, patient, waiting. I picked it up, cold and heavier than I expected, and rolled it between my fingers. It felt like a secret pressed into metal, something Jonathan had hidden in plain sight. I thought of all the times I had chosen not to press him with questions, all the silences I had let slide because our life seemed steady, because I wanted peace more than truth. Now those silences roared in my ears. The house, once warm with routines and flowers on Sundays, had become a stranger's home. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, the widow of a man she no longer knew. I sat down at the dining table, the cookies untouched between the teacups, and let the night stretch long around me. My fingers traced the edge of the key again and again, as if it might whisper answers. When the clock struck midnight, the silence was so complete that it hurt. My sister's words echoed in my head, the stranger's condolences blurred into noise, and my heart pounded with the suspicion that Jonathan's life had been larger, messier, and far more hidden than I had ever dared to imagine. That night, my fingers brushed against the strange key on the hallway table, the one Jonathan never let me use. I slid the key into the metal lock, my hand trembling, my heart whispering that some doors are better left closed. The garage stood like a forgotten relic at the edge of the industrial district, a row of weathered buildings with rust creeping along their roofs. Beads curled through cracked asphalt, swaying in the autumn wind. I had driven past this part of Charleston countless times, never once suspecting that Jonathan's weekly Thursday visits led here. Now, holding his strange key, I stood at the door of a place that seemed intent on pushing me back. The lock groaned when I turned it, the sound sharp in the still morning. A cold draft slipped out, as if the building had been holding its breath. The heavy door scraped the concrete as it lifted, and I stepped into air that smelled of dust, oil, and something faintly metallic, like forgotten blood. My fingers fumbled for the light switch, and when the fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, the truth blinded me. This wasn't a garage. There were no cars, no tools, no spare tires stacked in corners. The walls were covered, every inch plastered, with photographs, maps, clippings, a shrine to a life I didn't know my husband had lived. At first, I thought my eyes deceived me, but as I walked closer, I saw Jonathan in every image. Not the polished man in crisp button-downs, the dependable husband who brought me roses on Sundays. This Jonathan looked younger and looser. His shirts were wrinkled, his hair was untamed, and his posture was relaxed. He was smiling, not the careful smile I knew, but something unguarded, private. And always beside him was a woman. Dark hair fell around her shoulders, her eyes sharp and intelligent, her hand resting on his arm as if it belonged there. She was beautiful, younger than me, vibrant in every photograph. In one, they stood on a beach, waves foaming around their ankles. In another, a ski lodge with snow melting in their hair. A candlelit dinner, their faces tilted toward each other. My stomach twisted as I reached for a photo pinned to a rusted tack, scrawled across the back in Jonathan's handwriting. Isabel and Logan, August 2024. The name seared into me. Isabel. And Logan. A young man standing in several pictures, tall, dark-haired, his resemblance to Jonathan unmistakable. My hands shook as I shuffled through the images. Birthdays, holidays, casual snapshots of a family I had never known existed. The room tilted. 15 years of marriage, and I had been nothing more than a shadow on the edge of this other world. I staggered to the desk in the center, its surface littered with papers, bank transfers, tax records, letters stamped with foreign addresses. Numbers and names blurred before my eyes. Then a single medical report caught my attention. The Crescent Heart Institute, printed across the top. My lips moved silently as I read. Ischemic heart disease. Stage 3, risk of cardiac arrest, dated 2 months before his death. Jonathan had known. He had known his heart was failing, known he didn't have long, and instead of preparing me, instead of speaking a single word, he had poured his last strength into this. Into them. The room felt colder, the light too harsh. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breath, but it came ragged, shallow. The papers slipped from my grasp, scattering across the dusty floor like accusations. In the corner, a small wooden box sat, half open. Inside, tucked neatly, were receipts from restaurants, ticket stubs, and even a pressed flower wrapped in tissue. Tokens of affection, preserved with a care I had never seen from him. I wanted to scream, to tear the photos from the wall, shred the papers, smash the bulbs overhead until the room collapsed into darkness. But I couldn't move, my legs rooted to the floor, my hands numb at my sides. Every smile in those photographs was a lie to me, and every quiet dinner at home was a mask. The Jonathan I buried was not my husband. He was a stranger, a man who had given his real life, his true laughter, to someone else. I reached for the edge of the desk to steady myself, but the metal bit into my palms. A sound escaped my throat, half sob, half gasp. My knees buckled, and then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, hesitant, echoing against the concrete like a warning. My head snapped toward the doorway. A shadow stretched across the threshold, growing longer as the figure stepped into the light. My breath caught. The young man from the photograph stood there, with the same sharp jawline, the same dark hair, and the same intense eyes that mirrored Jonathan's. He looked at me as though he had been expecting this moment all along. Behind me, footsteps echoed in the doorway, and when I turned, the young man from the photograph was standing there. "Thomas Carter was my father," the stranger said, and my knees nearly gave way. The words echoed in the cavernous garage, bouncing off the metal walls until they felt like they were closing in on me. I gripped the edge of the desk for balance, my knuckles whitening against the cold steel. My voice caught in my throat. He wasn't lying. I could see it in his eyes. Sharp and steady, the same ones that used to silence a room without a word. The young man stepped closer, slow and cautious, as though afraid he might shatter me with his presence. "My name is Daniel," he said quietly. "Daniel Reed. I didn't expect you to find this place so soon." I stared, my breath quickening. He was taller than Jonathan, leaner, but his posture, the tilt of his chin, the way his silence carried weight. It was all too familiar. My chest tightened as I searched his face for traces of the woman in the photographs. I saw her too, the dark hair, the keen intelligence in his gaze. "Isabel, you're his son," I whispered, the words tasting bitter. "Yes." His answer was calm, unapologetic, as though he had carried this truth his entire life. My mind reeled. 15 years of marriage, and Jonathan had raised another family in secret, had built an entire world outside of me, and standing before me was the living proof. I sank into the chair beside the desk, my legs trembling. "How long?" My voice broke. "How long did you know?" "All my life." He didn't hesitate. I knew about him. I knew he was married. My mother respected that. She didn't want to interfere. His gaze softened for a moment, but it only stoked the anger clawing at my throat. "He kept us apart," Daniel continued. "He told me you were kind, that you deserved peace, but he never gave you the truth." I pressed a trembling hand against my forehead. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, the sound drilling into my skull. "Where are you here?" Daniel reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, its edges yellowed with handling. He laid it on the desk in front of me. "Because he gave me this. 2 weeks before he died. It's a draft of his will. Unfinished, not official." I hesitated, then unfolded it. Jonathan's handwriting stared back at me, looping, steady, achingly familiar. His words divided assets I didn't recognize, and he mentioned offshore holdings, under a name I had never heard. Mercury South Holdings. There, in a careful script, is access to the remaining documents secured in the office vault. The code is linked to a personal item gifted to V. My hand shot to my collarbone. The sapphire necklace. The one he had given me 2 nights before his heart stopped. I had thought it a gift of affection, a token of love. Now it felt like a cipher, a key to something much darker. Daniel's eyes followed my movement. "He left clues," he said. "But he didn't leave them just for me. He left them for you, too." I folded the paper with trembling fingers, each crease a jagged wound. The anger inside me burned hotter. Jonathan hadn't trusted me with the truth when he lived. Instead, he had turned his last days into a labyrinth of secrets. "I can't do this," I whispered. I pushed the will across the desk and stumbled to my feet. The walls pressed closer, the photos smirking at me with their frozen smiles. I needed air, light, anything but this suffocating chamber of lies. Daniel reached for my arm, but his grip was gentle. "Eleanor, wait. I know you hate me for being here, but I'm not your enemy. If you walk away now, you'll never understand what he left behind, and you'll never be safe from it." "Safe?" The word tore from me, sharp and bitter. "There are people," Daniel said carefully. "Men my father worked with. Men who know about Mercury South Holdings. They won't stop just because he's gone. They'll come looking for what he left." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I thought of Celine's too sweet smile, her strange request for money, and the way her eyes glittered, as if she knew more than she said. My throat tightened. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I admitted, the words slipping out like a confession. Daniel's expression softened. "You're the one who has the necklace. That means he trusted you, even if it was too late to say it out loud." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw the necklace into the river and let the current swallow it whole. Instead, I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. By the time I stumbled out into the morning light, my head spun with too many truths, too many betrayals. I couldn't face the quiet house waiting for me, its empty chair mocking my grief, so I drove to Maggie's instead. Her porch smelled of coffee and the faint sweetness of cinnamon rolls. She opened the door before I knocked, her eyes softening when she saw my face. I sat on her couch, the sapphire necklace gleaming like a live grenade on the coffee table between us. Maggie didn't ask questions. She never did. She brewed tea and set it before me, her hand brushing mine in silent support. I wanted to tell her everything, the photographs, the will, the sun with Jonathan's eyes. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stared at the necklace, its blue stone catching the afternoon light, and felt the weight of every secret pressing down. Daniel's voice lingered in my ears, steady, certain. "If you want answers, Eleanor, we'll need to open the vault." "I'm pregnant," Celine whispered, her hand on her stomach, and the world tilted beneath me. Her words rang in the air like a bell I couldn't silence. My chest hollowed out, and for a moment I wondered if I had misheard. But the sly curve of her lips told me I hadn't. She stood barefoot in her condo, silk pajamas clinging to her narrow frame, the city lights glowing faintly through the tall windows behind her. The scent of citrus perfume clung to her like armor. I had come here burning with questions, the sapphire necklace heavy in my purse, the draft will folded carefully beside it. I wanted to confront her about Jonathan, about the money, about the photograph of them laughing together. But I hadn't expected this. Not a pregnancy. Not another betrayal that cut bone deep. "You're lying," I said, though my voice trembled. Selene only shrugged, crossing to her liquor cart, the glass in her hand catching the light. She poured more wine and sipped it like a queen, granting me an audience. 10 weeks, she said calmly. I found out a week before he died. He knew. The room swayed. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "You were still seeing him? After Isabel died?" She smirked over the rim of her glass. She was never supposed to be permanent. I was always the one who stayed. Heat rose in my chest. 15 years of loyalty. 15 years of dinners at 7, flowers on Sundays, of swallowing questions and filling silences, and all the while Celine had been waiting in the shadows, sliding into my life with her painted nails and practiced pout. How could you? My voice broke, but my fury burned hotter than shame. "You're my sister." Celine set her glass down and sauntered closer. "Don't act so surprised, Eleanor. You had the perfect house, the perfect dinners, the perfect husband. While I was scraping by, working jobs that went nowhere, listening to Mom compare me to you like I was the broken one. Jonathan understood that. He gave me what I deserved. The slap came before I knew I had raised my hand. The crack echoed against the sleek walls, her head snapping to the side, her wine glass shattering at her feet. For a heartbeat I expected her to scream, but she didn't. She turned back slowly, her cheek reddening, her eyes sharp as blades. Then she smiled. There it is, the real Eleanor, not the prim, perfect wife, the woman who just found out she's been living a lie. I stepped back, my breath coming fast, the blood roaring in my ears. You slept with my husband. You betrayed me. And now you stand here asking me to accept this? Celine's hand stroked her stomach. This baby is innocent. He or she is blood, family, whether you like it or not. I wanted to scream, to rip the photographs from her walls, to demand every detail she had hidden. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with years of swallowed pride. My eyes fell on a framed picture on her mantel. Jonathan and Celine at a company holiday party 5 years ago. Champagne flutes raised, faces glowing. He had told me I was too tired to attend that night. The betrayal burned like acid. You stole everything from me, I whispered. Celine's gaze flickered, but she held her ground. I took what you didn't appreciate. You were his routine, Eleanor. I was his escape. Her words sliced through me like glass. I thought of the nights Jonathan came home late, of the key he guarded so carefully, of the necklace he pressed into my hand just before he died. All those small absences, all those silences suddenly screamed with meaning. I turned away, my fingers trembling as I gathered my purse. I couldn't breathe in her presence any longer, not with her perfume, her smirk, her swollen pride. The walls of her condo pressed in, the city beyond the windows blurring into meaningless light. Behind me, her voice came softer, almost pleading. "Say what you want, but this child is your family. You can't erase that." My hand froze on the doorknob. I wanted to deny her, to hurl every ounce of venom in my veins at her smug face, but instead my throat closed, and only silence answered. I stepped out into the hallway, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step carrying the weight of betrayal I could no longer deny. Her final words followed me, slicing the air between us. Celine's voice was like ice. "Whether you like it or not, Eleanor, my child is your family now." The sapphire necklace clicked open, and in that moment I knew Jonathan had left me something far more dangerous than love. The tiny clasp gave way with a delicate twist, revealing a hidden compartment no bigger than a dime. Nestled inside was a thin metal plate engraved with numbers. My breath caught. This was no ornament. It was a key. Daniel slid the plate into the keypad of Jonathan's office safe, the quiet beep sounding far louder than it should. I held my breath as the steel door released with a heavy sigh. Inside, stacks of folders leaned against each other like weary soldiers. A flash drive gleamed black against the gray metal, beside a small wooden box and a plain silver key tagged Bank, Safe Deposit, Federal Trust. I reached for the flash drive with trembling fingers, but Daniel's hand covered mine. "Not here," he warned softly. "Not yet." His voice carried the steady weight of someone who had been waiting for this moment longer than I had. Instead, I lifted the wooden box. The hinges creaked open, and my heart stuttered. A ring. Simple gold, a single diamond catching the sterile office light. My stomach dropped when I saw the inscription etched inside the band. "End always. Natalia." Not me. I pressed my lips together, my chest tight, refusing to let tears fall. 15 years, and I had never been given a ring engraved with devotion. That belonged to her. Daniel's jaw tensed as he looked away. He didn't need to say it. He already knew. But the worst came when we plugged in the flash drive at Franklin Shaw's law office hours later. The attorney's office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, the blinds drawn against the late afternoon sun. Franklin, balding and heavy-set, slid the drive into his computer with professional calm, though I caught the flicker of curiosity in his sharp gray eyes. A single folder appeared. Inside, one video file, dated 10 days before Jonathan died. I gripped the arm of the chair as the screen went black, then flickered to life. Jonathan's face filled the monitor. But it wasn't the Jonathan I remembered at Sunday dinners. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his hair disheveled, as though he hadn't slept in days. "Eleanor," he began, his voice heavy, worn. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. Maybe from my heart, maybe from someone else's hand. Either way, I'm sorry." My throat closed. "There's no easy way to say this," he continued, "so I'll be blunt. You weren't the one I needed to hide things from. You were the one I wanted to protect. But I waited too long. And now everything's closing in." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful with Selene." I froze. She wasn't just someone I made a mistake with. It wasn't simple. She planned this. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. The night I told her I couldn't keep doing it, she threatened me. Said if I left her, she'd go public with the money, the shell companies, everything I buried to keep you safe. His breath rattled. He looked away, then back at the camera. "And there's more. I think she killed Natalia." The words detonated inside me. Jonathan's voice shook. "I can't prove it, but the timing was too perfect. Natalia had packed her bags and booked a one-way flight to Lisbon. The next day, her car crashed. They said the brakes failed, but she had just had the car serviced. Selene knew she was pregnant. Natalia didn't, and that changed everything." Daniel's fist clenched beside me. Franklin muttered a low curse under his breath. On screen, Jonathan rubbed his face. I was weak. I built 2 lives because I couldn't give up either. But you, Eleanor, you're stronger than I ever was. If you want to walk away, do it. Take what's yours and leave them in the dust. But if you fight, don't do it alone. The screen went black. For a long time, no one spoke. The hum of the computer fan filled the silence, louder than thunder. My breath shuddered as I looked down at the sapphire necklace in my hand, the weight of Jonathan's confession pressing into me like iron. Celine hadn't just stolen my husband. She had destroyed a woman, carved herself a place in his life with threats and lies, and now carried his child like a crown. I closed my eyes. The truth was heavier than grief, but it was also sharper, cutting through the fog that had smothered me since the funeral. Franklin leaned forward, his voice steady. You need to make a decision. Keep this hidden, or use it. I looked at Daniel. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were steady, waiting for me to answer. My voice was a whisper, but it carried more steel than I had ever felt. We use it. And yet Jonathan's warning echoed inside me, cold and merciless. Jonathan's voice froze on the screen. Be careful with Celine. She is more dangerous than you think. I smiled at Celine across the porch, but this time my smile was sharper than hers. She wore a pale blue dress that clung to her frame, her hand resting proudly on her stomach, as though to remind me of the child she carried. The afternoon sun painted her hair gold, but her eyes stayed cold. We sat on Maggie's porch, the wooden boards creaking faintly beneath our chairs, a pitcher of sweet tea sweating on the table between us. For the first time since Jonathan's death, I didn't feel small in her presence. The flash drive had stripped the illusions away. I had watched my husband admit to his weakness, his guilt, and his fear of her. I had heard him call her dangerous, and though the truth seared me, it also armed me. I'm glad you reached out, Celine said, folding her hands neatly on her lap. I was worried you were angry. I tilted my head, my smile steady. Why would I be angry? Because my husband was sleeping with my sister, or because he left you part of the inheritance? Her lashes flickered, the first crack in her composure. Eleanor, no, I interrupted, my voice low. He didn't love me, he pitied me, but you? He feared you. That stopped her. For a heartbeat her smirk faltered, her body stiffening. I placed the flash drive on the table, its black surface gleaming in the sun. Her eyes darted to it, recognition flashing across her face. I know about the accounts, I said evenly. I know about the threats and manipulation, and I know about Natalia. Cilion's lips parted just slightly, then she recovered, leaning back in her chair. You can't prove anything. You're right, I replied, but I don't have to. For the first time, she didn't have a response. The silence between us thickened, broken only by the cicadas humming in the trees. I stood slowly, the boards groaning under my weight, and looked down at her. I'm not going to court. I'm not pressing charges. I'm not fighting for justice that won't come. I'm walking away. You can have the money, the lies, the child, all of it. Her eyes narrowed. You think that scares me? No, I said, my voice sharp as glass. But it will. I turned and stepped into the cool shade of Maggie's house, leaving Celine staring after me, the flash drive still on the table between us like a silent threat. Later that afternoon, Franklin met me in his office, his tie loosened, his eyes weary. I handed him the drive and a signed affidavit. If anything happens to me, I told him, make it public. All of it. He nodded without a word, sliding the evidence into his safe. For the first time, I felt like I had leverage. I wasn't just reacting anymore, but holding the power Jonathan had buried. That night, I returned to the house Jonathan and I once shared. The rooms were still, each carrying the ghost of our life. The empty chair at the table, the forgotten birthday card in his desk drawer, the jacket still hanging by the door. I walked through them slowly, touching the edges of picture frames, the smooth wood of the banister, and the cracks in the floorboards, which we never fixed, In the garage, I locked the door behind me, not because I feared discovery, but because I knew I would never return. One suitcase was all I packed. The clothes were enough for a new start, the memorial bracelet Maggie had given me after the funeral, and nothing more. A week later, the plane lifted into the thin Colorado air. Through the window, the land stretched vast and unfamiliar, the peaks of the mountains crowned with snow. I pressed my forehead to the glass, my breath fogging the view, and for the first time since Jonathan's heart gave out, I let myself breathe freely. I wasn't the woman who had been lied to, cheated on, erased by secrets. I was the woman who had survived them. The plane lifted into the thin Colorado air, and for the first time since Jonathan's death, I breathed without fear. In the end, Eleanor's journey was not about uncovering every secret her husband had buried, but about discovering the strength she had buried within herself. Grief had knocked her to her knees. Betrayal had carved wounds into her soul, but those very wounds became the proof of her survival. She had been loyal, even blindly so, giving her heart to a man who divided his life between her and others. She had endured the cruelty of a sister who twisted love into a weapon and turned blood into rivalry. Yet when all was revealed, she did not choose vengeance. She chose dignity. She chose to walk away, not because she was weak, but because her strength lay in refusing to let betrayal define her future. This story reminds us that family can be both our greatest blessing and our deepest wound. We are taught from childhood to believe in unconditional loyalty, to sacrifice endlessly for the people we call our own. But what happens when loyalty is exploited, when sacrifice is taken for granted, when love becomes a disguise for manipulation? Eleanor's life answers that question. You draw the boundary. You honor yourself enough to say enough. Family ties are sacred, but they are not chains. Blood does not excuse cruelty. Kinship does not justify betrayal. To stay in the name of tradition while your heart withers is not love, it is imprisonment. Eleanor learned that leaving was not abandonment, but liberation. It was an act of justice, not for others, but for herself. Self-worth is not something anyone else can hand to us. It is something we must claim when the world tries to strip it away. And though Eleanor's scars will never fully vanish, they will remind her that she endured, that she refused to be erased, that she chose herself when no one else did. Honor is not in keeping every vow to others, but in keeping the deepest vow to yourself, to live truthfully, to stand with dignity, to protect your peace. We all carry memories of being overlooked, silenced, or betrayed by those we trusted most. Perhaps your story is not as dramatic as Eleanor's, yet the ache of being not enough in your own family is a universal wound. And like Eleanor, we each face a choice: to let that wound define us, or to step beyond it into a life where we set the boundaries. Justice, sometimes, is not about punishing others. It is about refusing to let their cruelty write the ending of our story. Justice is walking away with your head held high, knowing you have preserved the one thing no betrayal can steal: your honor. In Eleanor's silence, in her final step onto new ground, there is a lesson for all of us. We do not need to destroy others to prove our worth. We only need to live so fully, so honestly, that their betrayal becomes small against the expanse of our resilience. And so the lingering truth remains: forgiveness is optional, revenge is hollow, but self-respect is eternal. Have you ever experienced this? The quiet breaking of trust within your own family, and the hard decision to protect yourself above all else? If you enjoyed the story, leave the number 1 and subscribe to the channel Family Fallout Stories to hear the next story.